The cold bit through the thin linen of her shift, a familiar and unwelcome guest in the damp darkness of the dungeon. Each breath was a shallow, rattling thing, tasting of mold and the metallic tang of her own blood. Alara, once the Duchess of Ashworth, now a nameless prisoner awaiting execution, pressed her feverish cheek against the slimy stone wall. The rough-hewn granite was a poor comfort, but it was the only anchor in the suffocating void of her cell. She could still feel the phantom weight of the crown on her head, a cruel jest of memory. Just a fortnight ago, she had been the pinnacle of courtly grace, the envy of every noblewoman from the Frostlands to the sunken sea. Now, she was a husk, betrayed by those she had loved most, stripped of her title, her dignity, and soon her life. The sting of the accusation, treason against the crown, was a fresh wound, though the true treachery was far more intimate. The scrape of a key in the rusted lock jolted her from her stupor. Heavy boots echoed on the stone steps, the sound of her doom approaching. She didn't have the strength to lift her head, her neck muscles screaming in protest. She simply waited, a marionette with its strings cut. Still alive, sister, how tenacious. The voice was like honey laced with hemlock, sweet and deadly. Lysandra, her younger half-sister, the one she had raised from a shy, awkward child, the one she had dressed in silks and introduced to the court, the one who had seduced her husband. Alara forced her gaze upwards. Lysandra stood silhouetted against the torchlight, a vision in emerald velvet. Her hair, the same shade as Alara's own fiery red, was intricately braided with pearls. She was a portrait of opulence, a stark contrast to the squalor of the cell. The candlelight softened Lysandra's features, making her look almost angelic, which only made the malice in her smile more grotesque. "Lysandra," Alara croaked, her voice a dry rasp. "Have you come to gloat before the final act?" "I have come to say goodbye," Lysandra purred, stepping daintily over a puddle of filth. Her gaze swept over Alara's pathetic form with theatrical pity. "It is a pity, truly. You were so magnificent, the sun of the court. But suns always set, dear sister. They are eclipsed by brighter stars." The words were a blade, twisting in Alara's chest. She remembered the day she had introduced Lysandra to Lord Cedric, her husband. The way Lysandra had looked at him, not with the shy gratitude of a sister, but with the hungry appraisal of a conniving merchant. And Alara, blinded by love and duty, had seen only a shy girl needing encouragement. "Where is Cedric?" Alara asked, though she already knew the answer. He was too much of a coward to see this through himself. He had always preferred to wield his cruelty from a distance, celebrating, Lysandra said with a light laugh, the sound discordant in the tomb-like silence. "He will be named my husband and the new Duke of Ashworth by the king himself at the winter solstice." It seems the little fairy tale of the common-born soldier and the duke's daughter has a new ending. A better ending, I must say, with a more appropriate heroine. Alara's hands curled into weak fists, her nails digging into her palms, but she felt nothing. She was too numb. The love she had once borne for Cedric had curdled into a bitter, consuming hatred. She had lifted him from obscurity, a mere captain in her father's guard. She had seen a fire in him, a determination, and she had foolishly mistaken it for ambition to better himself, not to better her. He had used her to climb the ladder of power, and now that he stood at the top, he had no need for the step upon which he'd trodden. "And my father," the question was a desperate gasp. She had always been his favorite, his pride. Surely, he wouldn't let this stand. Lysandra's expression shifted to one of mock sorrow. "Father, oh, he is so very, very disappointed. But he is also practical. A traitor in the family is a stain, but a dead traitor is dealt with. The Ashworth name must be preserved. I am all he has left. You were a liability, Alara. You always were." The final nail in her coffin. Her father, the man who had taught her to wield a sword and ride a horse, the man who had promised her to Cedric, had cast her aside without a second thought. He was as guilty as the others. He had known of Lysandra's plots, probably even aided them, all for the sake of keeping a more pliable daughter in the Duchess's seat. Alara's own family, the one she had fought to protect, had sold her for a few extra years of political influence. Why, it was the one question she could never answer, the one that had festered in her soul for the last few weeks. I gave you everything. You were a merchant's bastard, and I made you a lady of the court. Everything. Lysandra's pleasant demeanor shattered, her face contorting with genuine venom. You gave me your hand-me-downs, your cast-off suitors, your scraps of power. You always stood in the sun, Elara. I just wanted to know what it felt like to feel its warmth. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a sibilant whisper. Cedric felt it with me. He loved you, yes, in the way a wolf loves a fat lamb. But he craved me, the taste of forbidden fruit. And you, my dear sister, were the last bitter apple he ever had to eat. Elara felt a tear escape her eye, not of sorrow for herself, but for the girl she had been. The naive fool who believed in love and loyalty. You will not win, she said, the words spat out with a shred of defiance. He will use you as he used me. You will be the next husk he discards. Lysandra laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. Perhaps. But I will enjoy my time in the sun, dear sister. I will be the Duchess, the darling of the king. And you will be a pile of ash, scattered to the four winds. The name Ashworth will be a footnote, but I will be the new chapter. The guards came then, two hulking brutes whose faces were devoid of any humanity. They grabbed Elara by the arms, hauling her to her feet. Her legs were useless, the muscles atrophied from disuse and neglect. She was a ragdoll, dragged up the stone steps into the harsh gray light of dawn. The courtyard was crowded. The entire court was there, a sea of silks, velvets, and fur-trimmed cloaks. They had come for a spectacle, a tea-time drama. In the center of the square, a wooden pyre stood, piled high with dry kindling. Her own servants, the ones who had curtsied and bowed before her, looked on with blank, disinterested faces. At the front of the crowd, resplendent in crimson and gold, stood Cedric. He was beautiful still, with his chiseled jaw and dark, brooding eyes, the eyes that had once promised her the world. He refused to meet her gaze. At his side, his hand resting possessively on his arm, was Lysandra, smirking with triumph. Elara was shoved into the center of the pyre. The course would bit into her skin. The guards bound her hands to a post with rough rope that chafed her raw wrists. The king has spoken, a herald announced, his voice booming. Elara of Ashworth is found guilty of high treason against the crown. Her lands and titles are forfeit. The sentence is death by fire. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Elara looked for her father. He stood among the other lords, his face ashen and still, the very picture of a man aggrieved by circumstance. He did not look at her either. The coward, she saw the torchbearer approach. The man hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes meeting hers. She remembered him. He was a young guard she had once helped save from a charge of theft. He looked away. She saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, but it was gone before he could act. The flame met the kindling. The fire caught with an almighty roar, a hungry beast lunging for its prey. The heat was instantaneous, a searing wall of agony that stole the breath from her lungs. She screamed, a raw, primal sound of betrayal and agony that was swallowed by the cheers of the crowd. Oh, God, she gasped, the smoke filling her throat, tasting of burning flesh and charred despair. She saw Lysandra clapping, a smile of pure, unadulterated joy on her face. She saw Cedric, the love of her life, impassive, a statue of cold marble. The pain was unbearable, 1,000 red-hot knives piercing her skin. Her vision began to blur, the edges of the world turning a hazy red. This was it. This was the end. As her eyesight faded to black, she locked her gaze on the two figures who had destroyed her. Her hatred was a physical presence, a molten core of vengeance that burned hotter than the flames consuming her. Asterisk, if I had another chance. Asterisk, she thought, the words a desperate, silent prayer to a god who had abandoned her. Asterisk, just one more chance. I would make them pay. I would burn them all. Asterisk, asterisk, I would not be the lamb. I would be the inferno. The roar of the fire swelled, drowning out the last vestiges of her consciousness. The world dissolved into a cacophony of sound and pain, and then, nothing but a jolt, sharp and violent, ripped through her. It was not the pang of death, but the jarring shock of cold. She gasped, her eyes flying open. The stench of smoke was gone. In its place was the clean, crisp scent of clean linen and a subtle hint of lavender. She was in a bed. A soft, four-poster bed. Sunlight streamed through sheer curtains, dust motes dancing in the golden beams. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, terrified drumbeat. She looked at her hands. They were soft, unscarred.
No burns, no blisters.
She scrambled out of the bed, her legs shaky. She looked at herself in the polished, silver mirror on her vanity. The face that stared back was her own, but it was younger. The hollow cheeks were fuller, the skin unmarred by the ravages of grief and starvation. Her fiery red hair tumbled down her back in waves, untouched by the flames. It was her. It was her as she had been 5 years ago, at her chambers. She was in her family's estate. The room was filled with the belongings of the girl. She was before everything went wrong. On the dressing table, she saw a letter, sealed with the royal crest. A wedding invitation. Her wedding invitation. To Cedric, that the date on the invitation confirmed it. She was back. She was alive, resurrected on the morning of her wedding to the man who would murder her. The full weight of her horror and her impossible second chance crashed down upon her. She clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. The betrayal was a fresh wound, but now it was a weapon. The fear was a ghost, but it was one she could harness. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. The haunted eyes, the trembling lips. But behind them, a fire was kindling. A fire of pure, undiluted fury. Her lips curved into a smile, a cold, terrifying thing that never reached her eyes. Not the lamb, she whispered to her reflection, her voice low and full of promise. The inferno. The game was afoot, and this time, she was rewriting all the rules. Alara's fingers trembled as she traced the edges of the wedding invitation, the gilded royal seal cold against her skin. The date was unmistakable. The morning of her union to Cedric. The day she had walked down the aisle with a heart full of foolish hope, unaware that she was marching straight into a gilded cage that would become her tomb. She pressed the invitation flat against the oak surface of her vanity and forced herself to breathe. The air was sweet, untouched by smoke, and each inhale was a reminder that she was alive. Truly alive. Her reflection stared back at her, young and unscarred, but the eyes that gazed from the mirror were ancient. They had seen death. They had felt the licking flames. They would never be innocent again. A soft knock at the door shattered her reverie. "My lady, are you awake? The seamstress is here for the final fitting." Alara recognized the voice. Mira, her personal maid. The same Mira who had, in her past life, slipped poison into her evening wine at Lysandra's command. The same Mira who had wept false tears at her imprisonment while pocketing gold from her sister's purse. Alara's jaw tightened, but she smoothed her features into a mask of placid nobility. "Enter," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging within. The door swung open, and Mira bustled in, her arms laden with bolts of white silk and lace. She was a mousy thing, all deference and downcast eyes, the perfect image of a loyal servant. Alara watched her with new eyes, noting the slight tremor in the girl's hands, the way she avoided prolonged eye contact. Guilt, perhaps. Or anticipation. "The dress is absolutely divine, my lady," Mira chirped, spreading the fabric across the bed. "Lord Cedric will be speechless when he sees you." Lord Cedric. The name was a blade twisting in her gut. Alara forced herself to smile, a brittle, practiced expression she had perfected over years of courtly performance. "I am certain he will be. Tell me, Mira, has my sister been to visit this morning?" Mira's hands stilled on the silk for just a fraction of a second. It was barely perceptible, but Alara caught it. "Lady Lysandra sent word that she will join you for breakfast, my lady. She wished to help you prepare for your special day." How thoughtful, Alara thought, her smile never wavering. To watch me walk into the trap she helped set. Of course, Alara said aloud. I shall look forward to it. Please inform the kitchen that I wish for honey cakes and spiced wine. The good vintage from the southern cellars. My sister has always favored it. Mira bobbed a curtsy and hurried out, leaving Alara alone with the sprawling white dress. She approached it slowly, her fingers brushing the delicate lace. In her first life, she had loved this dress. She had seen it as the symbol of a new beginning, the first chapter of a love story that she believed would endure any storm. Now, it looked like nothing more than a funeral shroud. She yanked the fabric aside and began to dress herself in practical clothes, a simple woolen gown in deep forest green, sturdy boots, and a leather belt from which she could hang a small dagger she kept hidden in her trunk. The dagger was a gift from her father, given on her 16th birthday, when he still pretended to care. She strapped it to her thigh, the cold steel a comforting weight against her skin. When she was done, she studied her reflection once more. The green gown was modest, almost plain by court standards, but it made her fiery hair blaze like a battle standard. She looked like a warrior, not a bride. It was exactly the message she wished to send. The breakfast hall was a sun-drenched chamber overlooking the eastern gardens. Long windows stretched from floor to ceiling, flooding the room with golden morning light. The table was laid with silver platters and porcelain plates, laden with fresh bread, cheeses, and glistening fruits. At the head of the table sat her father, the Duke of Ashworth, his graying beard neatly trimmed and his stern features set in a mask of dignified authority. Beside him, Lysandra was already seated, her hair artfully arranged in loose curls, her gown a soft lavender that complemented her pale complexion. She looked up as Alara entered, and her face broke into a radiant smile. "Sister, you look practical this morning." Lysandra's voice was honeyed, but Alara could hear the barb beneath. "Are you certain you shouldn't be resting today? Will be so exhausting for you." Alara took her seat across from Lysandra, arranging her skirts with deliberate calm. "I find that activity steadies the nerves, sister. I have never been one to languish in idleness." Their father cleared his throat, his gaze settling on Alara with something that might have been concern or calculation. She could no longer tell. "Alara, your wedding is a great honor for our house. Lord Cedric has risen far through his service to the crown. You must ensure that you represent the Ashworth name with dignity. As you did when you watched me burn." The question burned on her tongue, but she swallowed it. She was not ready. Not yet. "Of course, father. I shall be the perfect wife." Lysandra giggled, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. "Oh, I am sure you will. Cedric speaks of you so fondly. He told me just yesterday that he cannot wait to make you his bride." Alara's gaze snapped to Lysandra. "He told you yesterday. I was not aware you had become so close with my betrothed." For a fleeting instant, Lysandra's mask slipped. A flicker of something dark and predatory flashed in her eyes before she smoothed her features back to placid innocence. "He has been so kind to me, Alara. Since you are to be sisters, I thought it only proper that we form a friendship. Is that not what families do?" Alara reached for a honey cake, her movements slow and deliberate. "It is, sister. Families support one another. They're loyal. They do not stab each other in the back." She bit into the cake, savoring the sweetness that she had been denied in her dungeon cell. "I am so grateful for the family I have. Truly." The air thickened. Her father's brow furrowed slightly, and Lysandra's smile became fixed, her fingers tightening around her goblet. Alara drank in the discomfort she had sown and found it delicious. Breakfast continued in a tense silence, punctuated by the clink of cutlery and the forced pleasantries of polite conversation. Alara watched her sister, noting every minuscule shift in her posture, every darting glance toward the door. Lysandra was waiting for something. Or someone. It came with the arrival of a servant bearing a sealed scroll. The man bowed low, presenting the missive to Alara. "My lady, a message from Lord Cedric." Alara took the scroll, her heart hammering, but her hands steady. She broke the seal and read the words within. It was brief, filled with flowery declarations of love and anticipation. The same words he had written in her first life, words she had wept over with joy. But there was a second piece of parchment folded beneath the first. A smaller note, written in a different hand. A woman's hand. She recognized the elegant loops and flourishes immediately. **, meet me in the Eastern Grove at noon. I have something urgent to tell you. L. Alara's blood turned to ice. The Eastern Grove. The same place where, in her first life, she had gone on her wedding day to meet her sister, only to find Cedric waiting instead. A staged seduction that he had used to convince her that Lysandra was a victim of her own girlish infatuation. It had been his first betrayal, the seed from which all others had grown. But she knew better now. She knew what Lysandra was capable of. And she knew that the urgent message was nothing but a trap. She folded the notes carefully, tucking them into her sleeve. Lord Cedric sends his regards, she said blandly. He is eager for our union. Lysandra leaned forward, her eyes alight with barely contained excitement. Is there anything else, sister? He seemed so very passionate in his letters to me. I cannot imagine what he must have written to you. Alara met her sister's gaze, holding it with a cold, unwavering stare. He wrote of his love, his devotion, his hope for our future. She paused, watching Lysandra's smile waver. He also mentioned that he has been feeling unwell lately. It seems his constitution is not as strong as we believed. Lysandra blinked, confusion flickering across her face. Unwell, but he seemed in perfect health when I saw him. I am certain he did. Alara interrupted smoothly. He is a man of great pride. He would never show weakness. But he trusts me, his future wife, with his burdens. It is what spouses do, is it not? We care for one another. Lysandra's cheeks flushed, a faint pink stain of anger. Of course. How fortunate that he confides in you so deeply. Alara rose from her chair, brushing the crumbs from her gown. I must prepare for the ceremony. The seamstress awaits. She moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to face her sister. Oh, Lysandra. I found a note in the scroll. It appears someone left a message for you. It was tucked beneath the seal. Quite curious. I thought it might have been an oversight. She pulled the smaller parchment from her sleeve and held it out. Lysandra's face went pale. Her hand shot out to snatch it, but Alara drew it back at the last moment. My apologies, Alara said, her voice silky with false regret. I have already read it. You wish to meet me in the Eastern Grove at noon. How thoughtful of you. Perhaps we could have a walk together. A sisterly talk before I become a wife. It could be our last moment of freedom before I am bound to Cedric for all eternity. Lysandra's composure cracked. Her eyes darted to their father, who was watching the exchange with a furrowed brow. I merely wish to wish you well, sister. In private. It felt more intimate that way. Intimate, Alara repeated, tasting the word like poison. Yes. I understand intimacy. I have learned a great deal about it lately. She stepped closer to Lysandra, dropping her voice to a whisper that only the two of them could hear. I know what you are, sister. I know what you have done. And I know what you intended to do in that grove. But let me make this clear. You will never see me walk into a trap again. I am not the lamb you believed me to be. She straightened, her smile returning, bright and dazzling and utterly false. I will see you at the grove, Lysandra. Do not keep me waiting. Without another word, she swept from the room, leaving her sister frozen in her chair, her face a canvas of shock and fear. The Eastern Grove was dappled in sunlight, the ancient oaks casting long, dancing shadows across the mossy ground. Alara arrived early, a full hour before the appointed time. She had shed her green gown for a riding habit of deep burgundy, the fitted jacket accentuating her slender frame. At her hip, a short sword hung, a blade she had trained with since childhood under the tutelage of the old weapon master. She was not there to be seduced. She was there to hunt. The rustle of leaves heralded a presence. Alara turned, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. Cedric stepped from behind a wide oak trunk, his face a mask of chagrined surprise. Alara, what are you doing here? I thought we were to meet at the chapel for the rehearsal. She tilted her head, studying him with an analytical coldness that made him shift uneasily.
He was handsome. She would grant him that.
Chiseled features, dark hair, the lean build of a man who had earned his rank on the battlefield. But his eyes were too calculating, his smile too practiced. She had been blind to it before. Now, she saw every flaw with crystalline clarity. "Curious," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "I received a note to meet someone here. I assumed it was you, my beloved." Cedric's brow furrowed in confusion, so well acted that even she might have believed it in her past life. "A note? I sent no note. I have been in meetings with the king's steward all morning." "No," Elara agreed. "You did not. But my sister did." She drew the note from her sleeve and let it flutter to the ground between them. "She wished to meet me here. I wonder what she wanted to discuss. Perhaps she intended to confess her undying love for you. Or perhaps she meant to deliver me into your hands so that you could play the gallant hero and expose her supposed scheming, thus securing my trust and your place in my father's favor." Cedric's face went utterly blank. For a moment he was speechless. Then, a nervous laugh escaped him. "Elara, you are imagining things. Lysandra is your sister. She loves you." "She loves my position," Elara corrected, her voice suddenly sharp. "She loves the power I wield. And you, Cedric, love the Ashworth name and the wealth that comes with it. Tell me, when you look at me, do you see a wife? Or do you see a stepping stone?" His composure shattered completely. His eyes widened, dark with something between fury and fear. "What has gotten into you? You are speaking madness." Elara stepped closer, close enough that she could see the pulse jumping in his throat. "Let me tell you what I see, Cedric. I see a man who will take my dowry, my lands, and my title. I see a man who will use my family's influence to rise to the highest echelons of power. And then, when I am no longer useful, I see a man who will discard me. Perhaps he will conspire with my sister. Perhaps he will accuse me of treason. And perhaps, Cedric, he will watch me burn." He staggered backward, his face pale as bone. "You are unwell.
You need to rest."
"The wedding." "There will be no wedding," Elara declared, her voice ringing with finality. "I will not marry you. I will not become your stepping stone. I will not be the lamb led to the slaughter." She turned on her heel, her riding cloak swirling around her. Cedric lunged for her, his hand grasping her wrist, his grip bruising. "You cannot do this. The contracts have been signed. The king himself is attending the ceremony." Elara whipped around, her free hand drawing the short sword from her belt. The blade pressed against his throat, a sliver of cold steel that made him freeze instantly. She saw the raw terror in his eyes, the utter shock of a predator realizing that the prey had teeth. "I can do whatever I choose," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "You think you own me, you think you own my fate. The Ashworth name will not be your ladder. And I will not be your victim. Touch me again, and I will carve the proof of your betrayal into your flesh." She released him, shoving him backward. He stumbled, his hand flying to his neck, where a thin bead of blood now welled. He stared at her like she was a stranger. In many ways she was "Leave," she commanded. "Return to your meetings and your schemes. But know this, Cedric. The game has changed. You do not know the players anymore. And you do not know the stakes." She sheathed her sword and walked away, her step steady on the forest floor. She did not look back. She did not need to. She already knew what she would see. The face of a man who had just realized his entire future was crumbling around him. As she emerged from the grove, she saw a familiar figure standing at the edge of the forest path. The king's own brother, Prince Theron, leaned against a tree, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. He was a man of few words, known for his quiet intensity and his fearsome reputation on the battlefield. In her first life, she had barely exchanged a dozen words with him. "My lady," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I happened to be passing by. I could not help but overhear your spirited conversation." Elara's heart seized. How much had he heard, how much had he seen, but she forced herself to remain calm. She curtsied, a smooth, practiced motion. "Your Highness, I apologize for the disturbance. Lord Cedric and I were merely settling a disagreement." Theron's lips curved into a faint smile. "I would call it a slaughter, not a disagreement. You handled him like a seasoned general." His dark eyes glinted with something that might have been admiration. "You are a most surprising woman, Lady Alara." She met his gaze, unflinching. "I have learned that surprises are the only weapon of the powerless, Your Highness." He laughed, a low, genuine sound. "The powerless, my lady. I have seen many things in this court, but I have never seen a woman disarm a man with words before drawing steel." He stepped closer, his presence radiating a heat that made her skin prickle. "Perhaps you are not as powerless as you believe." Alara felt the weight of his gaze, the unspoken challenge in his words. This was a man who held his own power, who operated in the shadows of his brother's throne. He was dangerous. He was unpredictable. And he was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "My lady," Theron said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "I would invite you to walk with me. I have a proposal that may be of interest to you, one that involves a new kind of partnership. I suspect you are in the market for one." Her heart raced, but her voice was steady. "And what makes you think I need a partnership, Your Highness?" His smile widened, slow and predatory. "Because I know you are about to become the most dangerous woman in this kingdom. And a dangerous woman needs a dangerous ally." The forest whispered around them. Somewhere in the distance, a crow cawed. Alara looked at Prince Theron, and in his eyes, she saw a future she had never dared to imagine. "I am listening," she said, and for the first time since awakening, she felt the faint stirring of hope, hard and sharp as a blade. The forest path wound deeper into the estate grounds, the ancient oaks giving way to a copse of silver birches that glittered like ghostly sentinels in the afternoon light. Prince Theron walked beside Alara, his stride unhurried but purposeful, and she found herself acutely aware of every shift in his posture, every subtle glance he cast her way. This was not a man who did anything without intention. His very presence here felt like a calculated move on an invisible chessboard. "I confess I have long admired the Ashworth family from a distance," Theron said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to weave itself into the rustle of the leaves. "Your father has built a formidable legacy. It is a pity that he does not seem to recognize the most valuable piece in his own household." Alara kept her gaze forward, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. "My father values loyalty above all else. He believes he has secured it in abundance." "Loyalty can be purchased," Theron replied, a sardonic edge creeping into his tone. "It can also be feigned. The question is whether the one who receives it is clever enough to tell the difference." He paused, stopping beside a moss-covered stone bench that overlooked a small, placid pond. "Sit with me, Lady Alara. I have a feeling this conversation will require more than idle walking." She hesitated for only a fraction of a second before settling onto the cool stone. The pond before them was still as glass, reflecting the pale blue of the sky and the drifting clouds above. It was deceptively peaceful, much like the court itself. "You spoke of a proposal," Alara said, cutting directly to the point. She had no patience for the courtly dance of veiled words and flirtatious innuendo. "Not anymore. I assume you did not follow me into the woods simply to admire the scenery." Theron smiled, a slow, appreciative curve of his lips. "You are refreshingly direct. I find that most women in this court speak in riddles, hoping to appear mysterious. You speak as though you have already run out of time." "I have," she said, and the weight of those two words hung heavy between them. "I have run out of time for games. I have run out of time for deception. And I have run out of patience for those who would use me as a pawn in their petty schemes." He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes piercing, as though he were trying to read the very depths of her soul. "Then let us speak plainly. You have just publicly humiliated Lord Cedric, your betrothed. You have threatened him with a blade and refused to marry him. By this evening, word of your defiance will have spread through every corner of the court. Your father will be furious. The king will be insulted. And Cedric, I suspect, will be seeking revenge. I am aware of the consequences, Alara said evenly. I did not act on impulse. I acted on knowledge. Knowledge, Theron repeated, tilting his head. What knowledge could you possibly possess that would make you willing to sacrifice your family's favor, your betrothal, and your standing at court? Alara met his gaze, and for a moment, she considered telling him everything. The betrayal, the fire, the impossible second chance. But she swallowed the words before they could escape. Trust was a luxury she could not afford. Not yet. I know that Cedric and my sister have been conspiring against me. I know that they intended to ruin me. And I know that my father, whether willfully or through negligence, was complicit in their schemes. Theron's expression did not change, but she saw a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. Interest. Perhaps even admiration. That is a heavy accusation. Do you have proof? Not yet, she admitted. But I will. I have already begun to gather it. The servant who delivered the false note, the correspondence between Cedric and my sister, the whispered meetings in the Eastern Grove. They have been careless in their arrogance. They did not believe I was watching. But you were, Theron said, and it was not a question. It was a statement of recognition, as though he were finally seeing her clearly for the first time. You have been watching, waiting, and now you are ready to strike. I am ready to defend myself, she corrected. There is a difference. Is there? He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. In my experience, defense and offense are merely two sides of the same coin. The one who waits too long to strike is often the one who falls first. She felt the heat of his proximity, the faint scent of leather and wood smoke that clung to his cloak. He was a dangerous man. She knew that instinctively. But danger, she had come to realize, was not always an enemy. Sometimes, it was the only ally worth having. What are you proposing? She asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. He leaned back, his posture relaxed, but his eyes remained sharp and calculating. I am proposing an alliance. You need protection from your enemies. I need a foothold in the Ashworth family. Together, we can achieve more than we could separately. A foothold, she repeated, her brow furrowing. You are the king's brother. You already have power. What could you possibly want from my family? Theron's smile faded, and for the first time, she saw something raw and unguarded beneath his polished exterior. My brother sits on the throne, yes. But he is surrounded by sycophants and schemers who seek to undermine me at every turn. I have no wife, no heirs, no allies of substance. The Ashworth name carries weight. Your father controls the northern trade routes, the largest private army in the kingdom, and a seat on the king's council. If I had your family's support, I could consolidate my position and protect myself from those who would see me destroyed. And what would I gain from this arrangement? Alara asked, though she already suspected the answer. You would gain a protector, he said simply. Someone who will stand beside you against Cedric, against Lysandra, against anyone who seeks to harm you. You would gain the resources of the crown to support your investigations. And you would gain something far more valuable than gold or titles. He paused, his gaze locking with hers. You would gain the freedom to be the architect of your own fate. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Alara felt a strange warmth bloom in her chest, a feeling she had not experienced in what felt like a lifetime. Hope. It was dangerous, she knew. Hope could be weaponized. It could be used against her. But it could also be the fuel that powered her revenge. I will consider your proposal, she said carefully. But I have conditions. First, I will not be a puppet. If we are to be allies, we will be equals. I will not bow to your whims, and I will not be sidelined in matters that affect my own future. Agreed, he said without hesitation. Second, I require absolute discretion. If word of our alliance reaches Cedric or my sister before I am ready to act, the entire plan falls apart. You cannot speak of this to anyone, not even your most trusted servants. Agreed. And third, she said, her voice hardening, if you betray me, I will destroy you. I will not warn you. I will not give you a second chance. I will simply erase you from existence, the same way you would erase a stain from a silk gown. Theron's eyes widened slightly, And then he laughed, a low, genuine sound that echoed across the pond. Lady Alara, I do believe you are the most terrifying woman I have ever met. It is an honor to be threatened by you. I am not joking, she said flatly. I know, he replied, his laughter fading into a smile that was almost tender. That is precisely why I trust you. They rose from the bench together, and Theron offered her his arm. She hesitated for a moment before accepting it. His grip was warm and steady, and she found herself drawing comfort from the simple contact. I will send word to you through a trusted courier, he said as they began to walk back toward the estate. In the meantime, I suggest you prepare yourself for the storm that is about to break. Your father will not take your defiance lightly, and Cedric will not remain idle. Let them come, Alara said, her voice cold as winter steel. I have been waiting for this storm for a very long time. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the estate grounds. As they emerged from the tree line, Alara saw a familiar figure waiting by the garden gate. Lysandra stood with her arms crossed, her face a mask of barely contained fury. Behind her, 2 guards flanked the entrance, their hands resting on their sword hilts. Alara, Lysandra called out, her voice sweet but edged with venom. Father wishes to see you immediately. He is in the Great Hall. I would not keep him waiting if I were you. Alara released Theron's arm and stepped forward, her chin held high. Thank you, sister. I shall attend to him directly. And you, Lysandra said, her gaze shifting to Theron with barely concealed disdain. What business does the king's brother have with my sister? Surely you are not so desperate for companionship that you must consort with a woman on the eve of her wedding. Theron's smile was cold and cutting. I was merely offering my congratulations to Lady Alara on her impending nuptials. It is a shame, truly. I had heard such wonderful things about her betrothed. I hope he proves worthy of her. Lysandra's face flushed an ugly shade of red. I am certain he will. Good day, Your Highness. Theron inclined his head, his gaze lingering on Alara for a moment longer than was strictly proper. Good day, Lady Alara. I look forward to our next meeting. He turned and walked away, his cloak billowing behind him like a dark banner. Alara watched him go, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She had just made an alliance with the most dangerous man in the kingdom. It was either the smartest decision she had ever made or the most foolish. Time would tell. The great hall was bathed in the warm glow of 100 candles. The long oak table stretched across the center of the room, covered in maps and documents that her father had been reviewing. He stood at the head of the table, his back to her, his shoulders rigid with tension. Close the doors, he commanded, his voice carrying an edge of cold fury that she had rarely heard from him. This is a private conversation. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind her, sealing her in with the man who had once been her greatest champion. Alara walked forward, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space, and stopped a few paces from the table. You summoned me, father. He turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made her stomach clench. It was not anger. It was something far worse. Disappointment. Condescension. The cold calculation of a man who had already decided she was no longer useful. I have heard troubling reports, he said, his voice deceptively calm. Cedric came to me in tears, claiming that you threatened him with a blade and declared that you would not marry him. Is this true? It is, Alara said without hesitation. And I stand by my decision. Cedric is not the man I believed him to be. He has been conspiring with Lysandra behind my back. They intend to. Enough, her father interrupted, his voice sharp as a whip. You speak of conspiracy as though you have proof. You have nothing but wild accusations and a wounded pride. Cedric is a respected lord with a bright future. Lysandra is your sister, who has only ever shown you kindness. And you have repaid their goodwill with slander and violence. Alara felt a cold fury settle into her bones. She had expected resistance. She had expected anger. But she had not expected such complete and utter dismissal. Father, I am telling you the truth. I have seen. You have seen nothing, he snapped, slamming his hand on the table. You are a foolish girl who has let her vanity cloud her judgment. You believe you are above the duties of your station. You believe you can defy your family and suffer no consequences. But you are wrong, Ilara. You are very, very wrong. He walked around the table, stopping mere inches from her. She could smell the wine on his breath, see the veins standing out in his forehead. You will marry Cedric tomorrow. You will go through with the ceremony, and you will be a dutiful, obedient wife. If you do not, I will strip you of your title, your inheritance, and your place in this family. You will become nothing. Less than nothing.
Do you understand?
Ilara met his gaze, and for the first time, she did not flinch. She did not cower. She did not beg. She simply stared at him with eyes that had seen the flames of her own funeral pyre. I understand, she said, her voice flat and emotionless. I understand that you have already chosen Lysandra over me. I understand that you have never truly seen me as a daughter, only as a bargaining chip. And I understand that you will regret this moment for the rest of your life. Her father recoiled, his face contorting with shock. How dare you speak to me in such a manner? I dare because I have nothing left to lose, Ilara interrupted, her voice rising for the first time. You have taken everything from me, my trust, my love, my future. But you will not take my freedom. I will not marry Cedric. I will not be your pawn. And if you try to force me, I will burn this family to the ground with my own hands. She turned on her heel and strode toward the doors, her heart pounding in her ears. She could hear her father shouting behind her, his voice rising in fury, but she did not stop. She did not look back. The doors swung open, and she stepped into the corridor, her chest heaving with the effort of containing her rage. The guards outside stared at her, their faces blank, but she paid them no mind. She had just declared war on her own family, and she had every intention of winning later that night, alone in her chambers. Ilara stood by the window and stared out at the moonlit gardens. The wedding was tomorrow. The trap was set. But she had a secret weapon now, an ally who could move pieces on the board that she could not reach alone. A soft tap at the door made her turn. A servant slipped inside, a sealed parchment in hand. The man bowed low and placed the letter on her dressing table before disappearing as silently as he had come. Ilara crossed the room and broke the seal. The handwriting was bold and angular, the words precise. Our asterisk, the king has called a council meeting for the day after your wedding. I will ensure Cedric is summoned. Bring proof of his treachery. I will do the rest. Asterisk, she read the words twice, then a third time. A slow smile spread across her face, cold and sharp as a blade. The storm was coming, and when it broke, no one would be prepared for the devastation it would bring. She folded the letter and tucked it into the bodice of her gown, close to her heart. Tomorrow, she would walk down the aisle. But she would not be the bride. She would be the executioner. The morning of her wedding dawned gray and cold, the sky heavy with clouds that promised rain. Ilara stood before her window, watching the gardeners scurry across the grounds like ants, laying white roses along the path that led to the chapel. Every petal was a lie. Every ribbon a thread in the noose they had prepared for her. She had not slept. The letter from Prince Theron was still pressed against her skin, a talisman of hope in a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty. She had spent the night going over every detail of her plan, every contingency, every possible betrayal. She would not be caught unaware again. She would not be the lamb. A soft knock at the door announced Myra's arrival. The maid entered with a tray of bread and watered wine, her eyes downcast and her movements timid. Ilara watched her with the cold patience of a predator observing its prey. My lady, the seamstress has arrived with your gown, and Lady Lysandra wishes to see you before the ceremony. She says she has a gift for you. A gift. How charming. Ilara could almost picture it. A poison necklace. A cursed brooch. Or perhaps simply the smug satisfaction of watching her walk to her doom. Send her in, Ilara said, her voice betraying nothing. Lysandra swept into the room like a breath of spring air, all smiles and pastel silks. She wore a gown of soft peach that complemented her fair complexion, and her hair was arranged in an elaborate cascade of curls. She looked like a portrait of sisterly devotion. It made Alara's stomach churn. "Sister," Lysandra cooed, crossing the room to embrace her. Alara allowed the contact but did not return it. She felt Lysandra's arms tighten around her, and she could almost hear the silent laughter beneath the surface. "I have come to wish you well on your wedding day. I know things have been tense between us, but I want you to know that I have always loved you. I only want what is best for you." Alara stepped back, extricating herself from the embrace. "And what do you believe is best for me, Lysandra?" Lysandra's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. "Why, to marry Cedric, of course. He is a good man. A strong man. He will protect you." "Protect me?" Alara repeated, tasting the word like something sour.
Yes.
"I am certain he will protect me from all the enemies he himself has cultivated. Tell me, sister, when did you first realize you wanted him? Was it the night of the harvest ball, when you danced with him in the garden, or was it the morning after, when you slipped into his chambers while I was still asleep?" Lysandra's face went white. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Alara had struck precisely where she intended. I do not know what you are talking about," Lysandra stammered. "You are speaking madness." Alara stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I have seen the letters, Lysandra. The ones you hid beneath your mattress. I have heard the whispers of the servants who saw you leave his rooms at dawn. I know about the Eastern Grove. I know about the arrangement you made with him to destroy me. And I know about the poison you planned to slip into my wine tonight, to make it look like a sudden illness." Lysandra staggered backward, her composure crumbling. "That is not true. You have no proof." "I have more than proof," Alara said, her voice cold as winter frost. "I have the truth. And by the end of this day, so will everyone else." She turned away, dismissing Lysandra, with a wave of her hand. "You may leave now. I have a wedding to prepare for." Lysandra fled the room, her face a mask of terror. Alara watched her go, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of satisfaction. The game was no longer one-sided. The pieces were beginning to move. The gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and delicate lace, embroidered with tiny pearls and silver thread. It was beautiful. Alara could not deny that. In her first life, she had felt like a goddess wearing it. Now, it felt like a shroud, heavy with the weight of all the pain it had witnessed. She allowed the seamstress to help her into it, her movements mechanical. The layers of fabric rustled around her like the whispers of the court. She studied her reflection in the mirror and saw a stranger looking back. A woman who had died and been reborn. A woman who would never be a victim again. Mira approached with a jewelry box, her hands trembling. "My lady, Lord Cedric sent this for you. A wedding gift." Alara took the box and opened it. Inside lay a necklace of sapphires and diamonds, a stunning piece that glittered with an almost hypnotic beauty. She recognized it immediately. It was the same necklace he had given her in her first life, the one she had worn on the night of their wedding. She had thought it was a gesture of love. Now, she knew it was a reminder of his greed. The sapphires were the color of her eyes. He had wanted to own her completely. She closed the box and handed it back to Mira. "Return it. Tell him I have no need of his gifts." Mira's eyes widened, but she did not argue. She curtsied and hurried from the room, leaving Alara alone with her reflection. The chapel was packed with the nobility of the kingdom. Every lord and lady of consequence had gathered to witness the union of the Ashworth heir to the rising star of the crown's military. The air was thick with the scent of incense and the murmur of polite conversation. Alara stood at the entrance, her arm linked with her father's, her heart pounding a steady rhythm against her ribs. Her father had not spoken a word to her since the confrontation in the great hall. He walked beside her now, stiff and formal, his face a mask of cold duty. She could feel the tension radiating from him, the barely concealed fury that simmered beneath his controlled exterior. "Remember your duty," he whispered, his voice a harsh rasp. "One wrong word, and you will regret it for the rest of your life." Alara did not respond. She simply lifted her chin and began to walk, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The crowd turned to watch her, their faces a blur of curiosity and expectation. She saw Lysandra in the front row, her smile fixed and brittle. She saw Cedric at the altar, resplendent in gold and crimson, his eyes gleaming with triumph. He thought he had won. He thought she would bow to his will, would play the part of the dutiful bride. He had no idea what was coming. She reached the altar, and her father released her arm, stepping back to take his place among the other guests. Cedric reached for her hand, his touch warm and possessive. "You look beautiful," he murmured, his voice meant for her ears alone. "I am so glad you came to your senses." Alara smiled, a cold, brittle thing. "I am glad you think so, Cedric. I would hate to disappoint you." The priest began the ceremony, his voice droning through the familiar words. Alara heard none of them. She was watching the doors at the back of the chapel, waiting. Theron had promised to ensure Cedric was summoned to the council meeting. He had promised to bring proof of his treachery. But the meeting was not until the afternoon. She would have to survive the wedding, the feast, the wedding night, before she could act, unless she could find a way to accelerate the timetable. As the priest reached the part of the ceremony where he asked if anyone objected, Alara felt a shift in the air. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. She turned, her heart leaping into her throat. The doors of the chapel burst open, and a herald strode forward, his voice booming. "By order of His Majesty, King Aldric, the ceremony is halted. Lord Cedric is commanded to appear before the Crown Council immediately." A murmur of shock rippled through the congregation. Cedric's face went pale, his confident smile replaced by a look of naked alarm. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "This is my wedding day." "The king's orders are not to be questioned," the herald replied, his tone unyielding. "You will come with me now." Cedric turned to Alara, his eyes wild with panic. "This is your doing, isn't it? What have you told them?" Alara smiled, the expression serene and utterly satisfied. "I have told them nothing, my love. But I have collected everything. The letters, the witness statements, the account ledgers that prove you have been stealing from the Crown's treasury to fund your little schemes. It seems your ambition has finally caught up with you." Cedric staggered backward, his face a mask of horror. "You cannot prove any of that. It is all lies." "Is it?" Alara reached into the folds of her gown and withdrew a sealed packet of documents. "I have spent the last several weeks gathering evidence, Cedric. I have spoken to the merchants you cheated. I have interviewed the servants you silenced. And I have uncovered the truth about your relationship with my sister." She turned to face the crowd, her voice rising. "Lord Cedric has been conspiring with Lysandra of Ashworth to destroy me. He planned to poison me on our wedding night and claim my inheritance for himself. I have the proof here for all to see." The chapel erupted into chaos. Lysandra screamed, her face contorted with rage. Her father lunged forward, his hand reaching for Alara's throat, but the guards were already moving, restraining him before he could reach her. "Treason," Alara said, her voice cold and cutting. "That is what this is. Treason against the Crown, against the Ashworth family, against me. And you will all answer for it." The herald signaled the guards, who seized Cedric and Lysandra. They struggled, their protests falling on deaf ears as they were dragged from the chapel. The crowd parted before them, faces a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. Alara stood alone at the altar, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had done it. She had exposed them. But the battle was not yet won. Her father's eyes bore into her with a hatred so pure it was almost tangible. "You will pay for this," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You have destroyed this family." "No," Alara said, her voice steady. "You destroyed this family when you chose ambition over love. I am merely cleaning up the mess." She turned away, her gown swishing around her. The crowd parted before her, and she walked through them with her head held high. At the entrance of the chapel, she found Prince Theron waiting, his face unreadable. "You did well," he said softly. "Better than I expected." "I had a good teacher," she replied, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "But this is not over. My father will not forgive me, and the king may not take kindly to being used as a weapon in my personal vendetta." Theron smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of his lips. "Let me worry about the king. You have done your part. Now let me do mine." He offered her his arm, and she took it, stepping out of the chapel into the cold gray light of the afternoon. The storm had broken. The players had been exposed. But the game was far from over. As they walked through the gardens, Elara felt the first drops of rain on her face, cool and cleansing. She looked up at the sky and allowed herself a small, private smile. She had survived the fire. And now, she was ready to rise from the ashes. The rain fell in sheets, turning the garden paths into ribbons of mud and washing the last traces of white rose petals into the gutters. Elara stood beneath the colonnade of the east terrace, watching the storm rage across the estate, and felt a peculiar stillness settle over her soul. The chaos of the chapel felt like a distant dream, a nightmare that had finally released its grip on her throat. Prince Theron stood beside her, his presence a steady warmth in the cold afternoon air. They had not spoken since leaving the chapel, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who understood each other without the need for words. "You are thinking about what comes next," Theron said finally, his voice low and measured. "About your father, about the king, about the mess you have created." Elara nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant treeline. "I have exposed Cedric and Lysandra, but my father remains. He will not forgive me for what I have done. He will see me as a traitor to the family, a threat to his legacy. And the king," she paused, her jaw tightening. "The king will not look kindly on a woman who disrupts the order of his court, even if she is in the right." "The king is a practical man," Theron said. "He values results over propriety. You have handed him a traitor on a silver platter. Cedric's theft from the treasury alone is enough to earn him a lifetime in the dungeons. His conspiracy with Lysandra is merely the icing on the cake. The king will not punish you for exposing corruption. He will reward you." Elara turned to face him, her eyes searching his for any hint of deception. "And what reward do you imagine he will offer me? A title, a pension, or will he simply allow me to live out my days in obscurity, a cautionary tale for other women who dare to defy their families?" Theron stepped closer, his hand reaching out to brush a stray strand of hair from her face. The gesture was intimate, almost tender, and it made her breath catch in her throat. "I have been speaking with my brother," he said softly. "I have told him of your courage, your intelligence, your unwavering commitment to justice. I have told him that the Ashworth family is in need of new leadership. And I have told him that I wish to take you as my wife." Alara's heart stopped. She stared at him, her mind reeling. "You wish to marry me?" "I wish to make you my partner," he corrected, his voice earnest. "In all things. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, Elara. You have faced betrayal, loss, and the very flames of hell itself, and you have emerged stronger than anyone I have ever known. I do not offer you this alliance lightly. I offer it because I believe we can build something extraordinary together." Elara felt a tear slip down her cheek, hot and unexpected. She had not cried since her rebirth. She had not allowed herself the luxury of weakness. But now, standing in the rain with a man who saw her as she truly was, she felt the last of her walls begin to crumble. "I do not know if I can trust again," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have been betrayed by everyone I loved. My father, my sister, the man I was meant to marry. How can I know that you will not do the same?" Theron took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "Because I have seen the worst of you, Elara, and I am not afraid. I have seen your rage, your pain, your thirst for vengeance. And I have seen the strength that lies beneath it all. I know what you are capable of. And I am not threatened by it. I am honored by it." He knelt before her, there on the wet stones of the terrace, the rain soaking through his cloak and plastering his dark hair to his forehead. "I do not have a ring to offer you. I do not have a crown or a title that is not already tied to my brother's throne. But I have my word, and I have my heart. And I give them both to you, freely and without reservation." Elara looked down at him, her vision blurred by rain and tears. She thought of the dungeon, the cold stone, the taste of ashes in her mouth. She thought of the fire, the the searing pain, the screams that had been swallowed by the cheers of the crowd. She thought of the moment she had opened her eyes in her childhood bed, reborn into a world that had betrayed her. And she thought of the woman she had become. A woman who would never be a victim again. A woman who had burned her enemies to the ground and emerged from the flames stronger than ever. "Yes," she said, the word falling from her lips like a prayer. "Yes, I will marry you." Theron rose to his feet, his face breaking into a smile so bright it seemed to dispel the gloom of the storm. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close against his chest, and she felt the warmth of his body seep into her rain-chilled skin. "I promise you, Alara," he murmured against her hair. "I will spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice." The days that followed were a blur of activity. Cedric and Lysandra were tried before the Crown Council, their crimes laid bare for all to see. The letters Alara had collected, the witness statements, the account ledgers, all of it was presented as evidence of their conspiracy. Cedric was stripped of his titles and sentenced to life imprisonment in the northern dungeons. Lysandra was banished from the kingdom, her name erased from the Ashworth family records. Alara's father was not charged, but he was stripped of his seat on the king's council. The Ashworth title was transferred to Alara, making her the first woman in the kingdom's history to hold the title of duke in her own right. It was a victory she had never anticipated, a vindication that felt almost too good to be true, but the greatest victory came on the day of her wedding to Prince Theron. The ceremony was held in the Great Hall of the Royal Palace, a magnificent space adorned with tapestries and golden candelabras. The entire court was in attendance, their faces a mixture of curiosity and awe. Alara walked down the aisle in a gown of deep crimson, the color of passion and power. She wore no veil. She wanted the world to see her face, to see the woman who had risen from the ashes of her own destruction. At her side, she carried a small bouquet of white roses, the same flowers that had lined the path to her first wedding. But this time, they were not a symbol of false hope. They were a reminder of everything she had overcome. Theron waited for her at the altar, his eyes shining with pride. He wore the colors of his house, black and silver, and he looked every inch the prince he was. But more than that, he looked like a man who had found his equal. "You are beautiful," he whispered as she reached him. "More beautiful than I ever imagined." "I am not the same woman you met in the forest," she replied, her voice steady. "I am something new, something forged in fire. And I am honored to stand beside you," he said, "for all the days of my life." The priest began the ceremony, his voice echoing through the hall. Alara listened to the familiar words, but this time they felt different. They felt true. She was not walking into a trap. She was walking into a future of her own making. When the ceremony was complete, Theron took her hand and led her out of the great hall and into the gardens. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The storm had passed, leaving the world fresh and clean. "You have done something remarkable," Theron said, his voice soft. "You have taken a life that was broken and rebuilt it into something extraordinary. You have shown the world that even the lowest of ashes can give rise to the most brilliant of flames." Alara smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I did not do it alone. You were with me every step of the way. You believed in me when no one else did." "I will always believe in you," he said. "That is my promise to you." They walked through the gardens, past the fountain where she had once sat with Lysandra, dreaming of a future that would never come. Past the rose bushes where Cedric had first declared his love, his words as empty as the promises he had made, and finally, they stopped at the edge of the forest, the same grove where Alara had confronted her betrayers. The trees were green and full of life, the shadows soft and welcoming. "This is where it all began," Alara said, her voice reflective. "This is where I first learned the truth about the people I loved." "And this is where it all ends," Theron said, his hand tightening around hers. "Or rather, where it all begins. The beginning of something new. Something better." Alara turned to face him, her heart full to bursting. She reached up and touched his cheek, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I love you," she said, the words simple and profound. I never thought I would say that to anyone again.
But I love you, Theron.
With all my heart. He leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her lips. And I love you, Elara. More than I ever thought possible. They stood there in the fading light, two souls bound together by fate and choice. The past was behind them, a ghost that would haunt them no more. The future stretched out before them, bright and full of promise. Elara looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. She thought of the girl she had been, the woman she had become, and the queen she would one day be. She had been reborn in fire. And now, she was ready to rule. Theron took her hand, and together they walked into the twilight, leaving the shadows of the past behind them. The grove was silent, but in the distance, Elara could hear the faint sound of a nightingale singing. It was the song of new beginnings, the song of hope, and it was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard.